Natasha and Her Illegitimate Child in a Muslim Society. A novel by Dr. A. Ahmed. This story is narrated in 2 books. Book 2. Copyrights. All rights are reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means without the prior written permission of the author, except by a reviewer who may quote brief passages in a review to be printed in a newspaper, magazine, school journal, or university article. This novel is a work of fiction, but the entire story is based on the actual life of a Muslim family in Sudan. Therefore, all names, characters, places, and incidents are either the product of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, events, or locales is entirely coincidental. Chapter 6. The Rival Wives and Their Polygamist Husband. Although the family with whom Natasha is staying is a small family, their neighbors have the biggest family she has ever seen in her life. At first, she thought that they were 3 families in one large family. But from Shama, she learned that their neighbor has 3 wives and 21 children. He is a polygamist. The whole family, including the father, consisted of 25 members. Some of those children are almost living in the house of Haja Fatima and Shama. From 6 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock in the evening, the children would be playing and running in and out between the 2 neighboring houses. In Sudan, neighbors have equal rights to each other's properties. The 2 neighboring women would share everything together except sex. In other words, the only thing that the 2 female neighbors could not share is their husbands. In order to grasp this, one should remember how a Muslim house is built, male section and female section. So, the 2 female neighbors have access and the same right on everything on the women's section of each other's house except the men's section. Natasha was amazed by the mixing of those 2 houses until she thought there was a strong blood relationship between the members of the 2 families. But she learned from Shama that there is no family relationship between the 2 houses except that they are good neighbors. As the days went by, Natasha began to know the 3 wives better and learn a great deal about the problems of polygamy from their many verbal quarrels and constant physical fights. Not a single day would pass without some disagreements taking place between the 3 wives. Usually, the problem would begin with a small quarrel between the children and then develop into a serious fight between their mothers. Haja Fatima is always the final judge whenever that quarrel takes place. One of the 2 wives would come and complain to Haja Fatima, and then the old widow would go and talk to the other wife and try to solve the problem and restore peace. The 2 wives would never inform or complain to their commonly shared husband about their fight. The husband leaves the house early in the morning and goes to work and would not return until evening. He is not supposed to know what has happened in his absence. All 3 wives learned from experience that if they involve the husband in their fights, he will hammer each one and abandon them both on beds for many days. So, the punishment would be doubled, physical beating, and no sex for a long time. Natasha felt that in a few weeks she collected enough data to enable her to write the biggest PhD dissertation on the topic of polygamy in Muslim society. She understood that polygamy has many bad consequences for wives as well as children. The children would grow confused and feel neglected and have not experienced enough love and care. The wives have no full rights in their house as well as their common husband and children. Every rival wife would think it is her duty to correct and bring up not only her children, but the children of the other rival wives as well. If the rival wife happened to be cruel, which is always the case, she would try to find any excuse to beat the children of the other rival wife, and that, as we mentioned, would lead to retaliation on the part of the other rival wife. And that retaliation would result in a counterattack and finally would engage the 2 wives in mercilessly hammering each other instead of the children. It is important to say that the wife might not be evil by nature, but polygamy will change her and convert her into an evil woman. Sometimes, the fight might result from jealousy due to the age and beauty differences between the many wives. Usually, most of the polygamous husbands prefer to have sex with the youngest and prettiest wife. Though not always the youngest wife would necessarily be the prettiest, but the male Arabs are exceedingly obsessed with small female children that no matter how ugly or dumb the small wife might be, she would always be preferred to the older ones. Also, Arab men are obsessed with virginity, and the new wife is a virgin, and sex with her will be enjoyable for a long time after she lost her virginity. Some Arab men will not marry a girl unless her parents take her to the hospital and examine her virginity and obtain an official virginity certificate produced by the best doctor. Another factor that might lead to jealousy and fight between the rival wives is the difference between the level of intelligence between the male children and the difference of beauty between the female children. For the Muslim woman to have beautiful daughters and intelligent male children are counted as a great asset. Beautiful females would be married off very quickly, and intelligent boys would go to school and obtain good education, which would enable them to have good positions in society. One thing which amazed Natasha about those three rival wives is the great troubles each one has to take in preparing herself for sex with her husband. Each one knows her night when she will have the husband all alone on her bed. On that day, she spends the whole day preparing herself for that important night. First, she must spend a few hours removing hair from her hands, legs, underarms, and pubic hair. It is the most painful experience that Natasha had ever gone through when one day she imitated one of the wives and began to remove the unwanted hair from her body and private parts, such as her underarm and pubic hair. There is no female beauty salon in many Muslim countries. So, women use very primitive tools in removing hair from their bodies. They use water, sugar, and lemon to make something called halwa. Those three substances would be boiled in the oven for a long time until something like gum or glue is created. Then, the wife would use that material to remove off the hair from her legs, hands, face, and underarms, and pubic hair. The wife will pour rivers of sweat and weep hot tears running while she is going through that ridiculously old-fashioned self-mortification experience. Yet, another painful and cruel experience every wife has to undertake is smoking her body. Every self-respected Sudanese wife has a small hole inside the kitchen. When she wants to smoke her body, she puts some live coals in that hole and puts sandalwood on the coals. When the coals begin to burn the sandalwood and generate aromatic smoke, the woman would strip herself bare naked, cover her body with a black blanket, and sits over that hole. She sits just like someone sitting on a toilet seat. She stays for a long time until the entire sandalwood is fully consumed by the fire. During that time, while she is using that antediluvian method, she will be coughing, her tears will be running as hot acid on her cheeks, and her body is sweating like someone sitting inside a sauna. Some Sudanese people claimed that this experience itself is sexy and women enjoy it so much. Scholars researching the origin of this custom have found that ancient Sudanese women used that smoke as black magic to stir the sexual desire of men. When the smoked body woman walked on the streets, men would smell the aroma of the sandalwood wafting off her body and associate the aroma with sex and follow her akin to a bitch in heat welcoming all comers. The Canadian academic scholar Natasha has found there are many more steps the three rival wives have to take in their preparation for sex, but they are lesser painful and cruel than the aforementioned ones. All in all, she has found out polygamy is one of the biggest tools of abuse Islam created for men to control and abuse women. Without exaggeration, she understood that polygamy is a more evil and greater tool of abuse of women than female genital mutilation. Chapter 7. The female genital mutilation. Natasha spent a couple of months with her two female relatives, Haja Fatima and Shama Yasser Sef Aldallah, and their large family neighbors. By then, Natasha and Shama have become good friends, just like old girlfriends or real sisters. During those 2 months, the Canadian girl hardly dared to step out of the house. She spent most of her time socializing with those two good female relatives and the three rival wives and their many children. In all that time, she could not see the husband of those three warring wives. She tried to convince the wives to introduce her to their commonly shared husband, but none of them was prepared to commit such a dangerous mistake. She has been told on her face that their polygamist husband might try to add her to the list of his harems because the Sharia permits him to have a total of 4 wives at the same time. So, no one of them wanted to shoot herself in the foot by showing their womanizer husband such a lovely and sexy Western girl as her. The fact that the pretty Canadian girl is highly educated and none of the three rival wives has been to school would make her more desirable to their philanderer Don Juan. In the meantime, the scholar Natasha tried to learn many things about those three rival wives. She has a laptop which she brought along with her. Luckily, her laptop was in her big bag when her handbag was robbed inside that damned bus. She recorded in her laptop many details about the day-to-day life of those three jealous wives and their many children. She has no access to any internet service. She depended on her laptop and the academic information she stored in her files before she came to Sudan. Whatever academic knowledge about women in Islam she learned during her bachelor and master religious studies, she has it stored in her laptop. But she soon discovered that the Western academic education is not revealing everything those abused Muslim women go through in their daily life in a polygamist home. The fieldwork she carried out during those 2 months equipped her with so much knowledge and great experience of polygamy. While the Canadian girl is deeply engrossed in her fieldwork on those three rival wives, something terrible happened that has almost made her stop her research and carry up her belongings and return to Canada. One day she is informed by one of the three wives that she is going to circumcise one of her little daughters. Natasha tried to convince the mother that what she intended to do to her daughter would harm her rather than benefit her. The woman is shocked when she heard that female genital mutilation harms her daughter and not good for her. Therefore, she lectured the uncircumcised Western girl Natasha on the many benefits of female genital mutilation and the danger of having an uncircumcised daughter. According to her, the uncircumcised girl will become like a wild animal when she grows up and she can't be tamed. She will definitely fall into disgrace, commit adultery before marriage, and bring great shame to her family. After that, she will either be slain in honor killing by her family, or get scourged by the Sharia court, or runs away from home and becomes a prostitute in another far city. No matter how Natasha tried, she couldn't convince the mother not genitally mutilation her small daughter. When she was in Canada, through her study Natasha learned some information about female genital mutilation. She learned it is a required Islamic religious obligation and backed by some authentic hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad. Amatia al-Ansari narrated that a woman used to circumcise in Medina, and the Prophet said to her, "Do not overdo it, because this makes a woman more favorable, and it is more agreeable for the husband." Sahih al-Bukhari. Quoted in Libas pages 63 to 64, and in Istidsan page 51. Sahih Muslim, quoted in Tahara page 49. Shaltat, Kaitan al-Untha, in Liwa al-Islam, 1951, page 55. Aisha narrated another authentic hadith that the Prophet Muhammad said, "When a man sits between the four parts, arms and legs of his wife during sexual intercourse, and the two circumcised parts meet, then ghusl or ablution is obligatory." Sahih Muslim. Hadith number 349. By the two circumcised parts the Prophet Muhammad means the man's circumcised penis and the wife's circumcised vagina or pussy. Yet, in another hadith, the Prophet Muhammad said, "Circumcision is a sunnah for men, and it is also a preservation of honor for women." Hadith of Abu al-Malik and Abu Dawud. Following the commandment of the Prophet Muhammad, Muslims circumcised their girls so that they could preserve the honor of the family. Every Muslim girl would be circumcised at the age of 4 or 5. Female genital mutilation or cutting involves the removal of the sealing of the labia majora and the labia minora together after the entire clitoris has been removed, citing an article by Lois 1985, page 115. When the girl undergoes the procedure of female genital mutilation, she will become abnormal. Her vagina will be so narrowed or so sealed that it will be reduced to a small hole that allows the girl only to urinate. The woman who performs the circumcision will use a straw that little bigger than a needle and smaller than a nail to measure the hole that should be left open after the circumcision. That hole will be a little bigger than the eye of a needle. When the girl reaches the age of adolescence, she will not be able to practice sex, even if she wants to do so. The circumcised girl will experience unbearable pain and feels as if she has been raped, and that will supposedly prevent her from having sex before marriage. She will not be able even to practice masturbation. That is the main reason for such barbaric and painful operation, to prevent the girl from indulging in sex without the sanctity of the marriage bond. Accordingly, female genital mutilation or circumcision is meant to control the sexuality of the woman and destroy her desire for the opposite sex. It is barbaric, painful, and harms the woman. What troubled Natasha and made her exceedingly angry is the primitive and cruel way that operation has been performed by a female circumciser who has nothing to do with medical knowledge and the surgeon's experience. As a matter of fact, that woman had never been to school or study medicine or had been trained as a midwife. She is an illiterate woman who does not know to read and write, even in her mother tongue, the Arabic language. She inherited the procedure from her mother, who got it from her grandmother, and so on. As part of her fieldwork, Natasha forced herself to attend that painful operation. The woman has subjected the 4-year-old girl to the most brutal operation Natasha had ever seen in her life. The little girl has been tied with the ropes through hands and legs. Then, her mother carried her and took her to a dark room that was lit with a dim local lamp. There is a woman who is known as the midwife and circumciser whose duty is to help women deliver their babies and circumcise small girls. The little girl does not know what they are going to do to her. Most probably she thought they wanted to squeeze a baby out of her stomach. After that, her mother removed the ropes from her legs and forced her to lie on her back. The little female child began to scream. Her fear intensified when she saw the midwife holding a sharp razor in her hand. Some circumcisers use their kitchen knives for performing the same circumcision procedure. The 4-year-old girl's mother closed her mouth to stop her from screaming. The child is so terrified when she thought the woman is going to slice her throat with a razor. The neighbors, Haja Fatima and Shama, who happen to be there inside the room, are asked by the mother to help. Neither of the other 2 rival wives nor their grown-up daughters would lend a helping hand on such an occasion. Even Natasha refused to help when she was asked by the mother. Each one of the 2 widows held one leg of the child and spread it as far as possible. The child could not scream because her mother was putting both hands on her mouth. Then, the midwife began to examine the private parts of the female child. She used wet cloths to clean up the tiny vagina of the small girl. Those clothes have been soaked into normal hot water. The woman does not use any freezing nor anesthesia or apply anything else except the water. Then, she began to cut off the female child's clitoris and slice her labia majora and labia minora. Although 3 grown-up women are holding the female child, still the terrible pain made the female child struggle for relief and release from that unbearable torture. After removing those organs, the midwife used a reed to measure the hole that should be left open after the operation is over. The pain increased to an unbearable state when the woman began to seal the 2 sliced parts of the labia majora and labia minora. The blood is gushing out of the female child's private parts like red liquid. Both hands of the midwife are smeared with blood. Even the blood reached the clothes of her mother, Haja Fatima, and Shama. The female child fainted before the stitching of her 2 labias is completed. Natasha always shudders and terrifies whenever she remembers that primitive, barbaric, and painful operation of female genital mutilation. After witnessing that inhumane operation, Natasha decided to return to her country and forget about doing any further fieldwork among those backward and primitive people. Albeit, she has somehow restrained her emotions and stayed behind. She understood that if she runs away from those horrifying experiences, she will abandon those poor female children and those victimized women. She felt it was her duty and divine calling to witness those evil practices and later expose them and let the entire world know about them. After witnessing that cruel and evil operation, Natasha wondered why the feminists in the West do not speak or condemn such evil practices. Why do the Muslim feminists always try to deny and hide those practices and falsely claim they have nothing to do with Islam? Many of them say, female genital mutilation is an African custom and has no Islamic authoritative justification. They purposely ignore the above-quoted authentic hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad which encourage and endorse female genital mutilation. If such evil practice is an African custom and predated Islam, then why the Quran and the hadiths did not abolish and discourage it? Why such an evil custom is only practiced by Muslims who are living in the Middle East, Africa, and in some Western countries. Muslim feminists do not care about those practices because they are not done to them or to their female children because they are living in the West, and they have been protected by Western laws. They do not want to admit that it is an Islamic obligation because they do not want to be accused of following a religion that justifies and allows polygamy, child marriage, wife-beating, and female genital mutilation. They fool the people in the West by arguing that everything that is not mentioned in the Quran cannot be accepted as authentic teachings of Islam. But this kind of fallacious argument perpetuates those evil practices which are always part and parcel of the authentic teachings of the Prophet Muhammad. Not all Islamic rituals and practices are mentioned in the Quran. In fact, 75% of the Sharia laws and practices have been taken from the Prophet Muhammad's Sunnah and Hadiths. From the very beginning, many Islamic dogmas and tenets had not based on the teachings of the Quran. As a matter of fact, most of the teachings of Islam on women are found in the sacred Hadiths rather than in the Holy Quran. Accordingly, Natasha understood that the feminists' fallacious arguments are harmful to those Muslim children and women who experience those evil practices in their Muslim countries. Chapter 8. On the night of the groom entering his bride. One evening, the two widows, Haja Fatima and her daughter-in-law Shama, have been invited for a wedding by a family that is living remarkably close to their house. The Canadian girl Natasha by now has become known to all neighbors as a female close relative of the two widows. Therefore, she also has been invited to the wedding. After attending the wedding, Natasha genuinely enjoyed the marriage ceremony and liked the groom and his lovely bride. She did not see anything that unusual about the matrimonial union between the young couple. She guessed that the bride's age is most probably between 18 to 20 years in her age, and her groom is not much different from her in his age. It is the first Sudanese wedding she attended. In her mind, she is having those stories she heard when she was in Canada of Muslim underage girls being married to men as old as their fathers or grandfathers. But that wedding seemed to refute such a belief. She wishes that she could always see such a wonderful marriage between the bride and the groom who do not differ much in age. Sadly, that wonderful picture is shattered in pieces on the third night of the marriage between those lovely, wedded couples. The third night is called the night of entering or penetration. In other words, the night in which the groom and his bride are supposed to have sex together for the first time. The groom would not be allowed to take his bride to his house until he sleeps with her in her father's house and confirmed that he found her to be a virgin, and he is the first man to penetrate and break her hymen. That is not enough, but the bride must prove to her family, relatives, in-laws, and neighbors that she is a virgin before her hymen has been broken by her groom. Now the difficult question, how could she prove to people other than her groom that she is a virgin? In order to answer that question, we should see what has happened between those lovely couples which Natasha loved so much, and she praised their wonderful matrimonial union. It so happened on that night of entering, while Natasha was in deep sleep, she heard a girl screaming at the top of her voice. It was at 2:30 midnight when that shouting sounded like a fire alarm and drove the sleep away from Natasha and filled her heart with indescribable dread. At first, the Canadian girl thought the screaming is coming from the house of the three rival wives. But when the screaming increased and continued on, she perceived it was coming from the house of the newly wedded couple who were in the house in the opposite direction. Her first reaction is to pick up her cell phone and dial 911. However, she remembered that she is in Sudan, and there is not a 911 police number to call. Besides that, neither she nor her relatives have a cell phone. Natasha ran to Haja Fatima's room and woke her up. She told her there is a girl who is screaming for help because someone is trying to rape her or a wife has been attacked by her angry husband. Before answering her, Haja Fatima looked at Natasha to see whether she was serious or not. When she saw the eyes of Natasha were full of fear, she laughed and told her there was nothing like that. It is the bride whose wedding they attended a couple of days ago. She is screaming because her husband is trying to sleep with her for the first time, and she is not supposed to allow him to have sex with her, but he would do it to her anyhow. Just go to sleep, my daughter, and put a pillow on your ears. As soon as Haja Fatima made those remarks, she fell again in her bed as if there was nothing going on. Natasha returned to her bedroom while she was still extremely troubled and exceedingly frightened. She remained awake and sat on her bed and listening to the screaming of that bride, which continued for at least an hour and a half. That night Natasha did not sleep until morning. Early in the morning she went and woke up her girlfriend Shama and asked her whether she heard the screaming of a girl last night. Shama said yes, she heard it, but she covered her ears with a pillow and fell asleep again. Natasha insisted that Shama should explain to her that strange custom which seemed to be okay for everyone except her. Shama explained the reason behind that screaming and jokingly told Natasha that she must do the same when she gets married. Then Shama said she herself screamed and fought with her late husband Tariq Hassan Shams al-Din on their first wedding night until he did it by force. According to Shama, it is a required custom that every bride must resist and fight against her groom over her virginity, and she must not allow him to have sex with her until he does it by force. Therefore, from her female relative, Shama, the Canadian girl Natasha learned more about that bizarre custom regarding the bride and the groom on their wedding night. According to that custom, the bride is not supposed to allow her groom to have sex with her on their wedding night. The custom required that the groom should try by all means to force his bride to yield to his sexual desire. Consequently, the wedding night would turn into a physical fight and struggle between the groom and his bride. According to the custom, at midnight the bride would be brought by some young women to a room where her groom would be waiting for her. Then, the girls would lock the room from without and leave. As soon as the groom became sure that the door was locked and the bride had no way of escaping, he would attack her. The bride would start running around in the room and scream as loud as she could and call for help. The groom would know that no one would come to her rescue, and hence he would continue to chase her around the room as a cock chases its hen or a male dog its female dog. When the groom succeeded in catching the bride, then the real physical fight would begin. It would not be just a small fight, but a real one in which each of them would apply full strength. The bride should fight with her hands, legs, and teeth. She should scratch, kick, hit, and bite the body of her groom. The groom, in addition to his self-defense, is supposed to tear off the bride's clothes. Though he might succeed in stripping her fully naked, he still has to face the difficulty of forcing her to yield to his sexual desire. Meanwhile, the bride would continue to fight and defend her virginity until the last soldier she is would fall dead. Although the groom might be able to force his bride to give up her struggle and surrender to his physical strength still, he would face another difficult task. In order to explain the last difficulty that the groom would face on his wedding night, we need to retell what we had said about the female genital mutilation. According to the Prophet Muhammad, circumcision is a law for men and a preservation of honor for women. Sunan Abu Dawud. Following the commandment of the Prophet Muhammad, Muslims circumcise their girls when they're small so that when they grew up, they might preserve the honor of their families. Every Muslim girl would be circumcised at the age of 4 or 5. Female genital mutilation or cutting involves the removal of the sealing of the labia majora and the labia minora together after the entire clitoris has been removed, citing an article by Lois 1985, page 115. Some Muslims argue that those private parts which the midwife would excise during the circumcision would grow again. This is not true. Those parts will never grow again. Once the clitoris and the labias are removed, they are gone forever. When the small girl undergoes the female genital mutilation, she would become abnormal. Her vagina would be so narrowed or so sealed that it would be reduced to a small hole that allows only the girl to urinate. The woman who performs the circumcision would use a reed that little bigger than a needle and smaller than a nail to measure the hole that should be left open after the circumcision. That hole would be a little bigger than the eye of a needle. It is just like locking up the small girl's vagina or placing a secure padlock on her private parts. The pre-Islamic Arabs used to fashion underwear made of iron and put it around the private parts of their women. When their women were taken as female captives, their captors might not be able to rape them. The same idea passed on to Muslims and practiced today, even in an eviler way. Instead of putting a lock around the privates of the woman, in Islam, the lock is placed in the girl's vagina. Therefore, when the girl reaches the age of puberty, she will not be able to practice sex even if she wants to do so. The circumcised girl will experience unbearable pain as if she has been raped, and that would prevent her from having sex before marriage. She will not be able even to practice masturbation. Sometimes, the hole becomes so small that the groom will not be able to insert his finger in his bride's vagina. The man's erected phallus is too large to go through such a small hole. Therefore, female genital mutilation or circumcision is meant to control the sexuality of the woman and destroy her desire for the opposite sex. On her first wedding night, the circumcised girl will experience terrible pain and feels as if she has been raped. In many cases, men could not be able to penetrate until their brides were taken to the hospital. Those genitally mutilated girls would undergo surgeries to widen their vaginas so that their husbands could have sex with them. Sometimes, a groom might scare that the people might think that he is sexually impotent or gay, so he would do everything he could to penetrate inside the vagina on his wedding night. There are reports of cases where the grooms used knives or a pair of scissors to widen their brides' vaginas. Despite this animalistic attack, still, this evil custom is not considered to be rape. Before we tell the morals behind such harmful customs, we must mention its bad consequences. In so many cases, the wedding night of the honeymoon ended in the hospital with serious injuries, not only to the bride, but to the groom too. Sometimes, the bride might be healthy and stronger than her groom. So, there were cases in which brides had broken the hands or legs of their grooms. Broken teeth and rips were common injuries among the defeated grooms by their strong brides. In exceedingly rare cases, a defeated groom was forced to scream for help. If there are no morals behind such a bizarre custom, then we might conclude that it was taken from beasts. Firstly, the bride through her fight is supposed to prove to her husband that she is so strictly brought up by her family that she would not allow even her groom to rob her of her virginity. In other words, she would not allow any man to have sex with her even in an acceptable way or the halal marriage. Secondly, by wailing and bewailing she would prove to her family, her in-laws, her relatives, and her neighbors that she is a good girl and a securely sealed virgin. Therefore, on that wedding night, the groom has raped his bride inside her parents' house and with the knowledge and witness of everyone in that area. Even so, no one called in the cops or blamed him for the brutal way he raped his bride. Chapter 9. Female Child Marriage in Islam. After that midnight's terrifying experience, Natasha lost all respects for the Sudanese Muslims, men as well as women. How could rational and moral human beings whom God endowed with intellect and conscience allow such an evil practice in which an innocent girl has been brutally raped by a man, and they call it a good custom? She could not find any rational as well as moral justification for such an evil practice. Natasha considered that custom to be a justified and legalized rape in the name of religion. Even so, she knew she could do nothing at that time to stop such an evil practice. The only thing she could do when she would return to her country, Canada, she would write and expose it as another evil form of women's abuse. The following morning, she heard through Haja Fatima and her girlfriend Shama that the bride was taken to the hospital at midnight because her groom used a pair of scissors to widen her vagina, and that led to infection and profuse bleeding. On hearing that incredible news, Natasha concluded that those people are either mentally retarded human beings due to the culture of shame and the evil teachings of Islam about women's sexuality, or sick society which needs outside assistance. While Natasha still could not comprehend the rationale behind that evil custom of raping the bride on her wedding night, yet another new disturbing news tortured her already bleeding conscience. She heard that one of the 12-year-old daughter of the first wife is engaged to her male cousin, who is 25-year-old, and in a couple of months, they are going to get married. When Natasha said to her girlfriend that the girl was still a child, Shama told her that the betrothed girl is big enough and has already begun to menstruate. She quickly added that such an adult girl could carry it. Natasha has no idea about what her female relative is trying to convey by the statement, she could carry it. When she is questioned, Shama said the 12-year-old girl could carry her groom's penis inside her pussy because she has her first period at the age of 11. She then said that when she got married, she was 13 years old, and she was able to bear the pain of her husband's large penis when he had forcibly inserted it inside her tiny pussy. Natasha rebuked Shama for her stupid analogy and silly justification. Then Shama said, according to Sharia, the Muslim girl becomes marriageable at the age of 9, and therefore she could be given in marriage at that childhood age. The Sharia based its ruling on the example of Aisha, who was given in marriage to the Prophet Muhammad at the age of 6, and he consummated his marriage with her when she became a 9-year-old girl. Accordingly, she said the Sudanese law allows the father to give in marriage his 10-year-old daughter. Natasha became extremely mad with Shama. She understood that if she rejects the teaching of the Sharia, she might be accused of not being a true Muslim or an apostate girl. So, she ignored Shama and talked to Hajja Fatima about this serious matter and tried to convince her to talk to the mother of the underage girl. Hajja Fatima quoted for her the common story which Muslims always use to justify pedophilia. The Prophet Muhammad married our mother Aisha when she was 6-year-old and slept with her when she was 9-year-old. Well, let us verify the claims of Hajja Fatima and Shama and see what the biography of the Prophet Muhammad had said about his marriage with his beloved wife Aisha. Aisha bint Abu Bakr, the child bride, was Muhammad's third wife. Aisha herself narrated, "The Messenger of God married me in Shawwal in the 10th year after of his prophethood, 3 years before the migration, as I was 6 years old. I was 9 years old when he consummated the marriage with me." Ibn Hisham holds that Muhammad married her when she was 7 years old and consummated the marriage with her when they were in Medina when she was 9 years old. The Messenger of God did not marry any other virgin but her. Aisha narrated, "The Messenger of God married me when I was still playing with the girls. I did not know that the Messenger of God married me until my mother took me and locked me up in the house. Then I realized that I was married." Aisha also said, "I was playing with the girls during the lifetime of the Messenger of God. The Messenger of God came to me when I was playing with the girls and asked me, 'What is this, Aisha?' I said, 'The horses of Solomon.' He laughed. I would be playing with my dolls," narrated Aisha, "with the girls who were my friends, and the Prophet would come in and they would slip out of the house, and he would go out after them and bring them back, for he was pleased for my sake to have them there. Sometimes he would say, 'Stay where you are,' before they had time to leave, and he would also join in our games." These narrations tell that the Prophet Muhammad married Aisha when she was a child of 6 years of age and had sex with her when she was 9 years old, and no Muslim scholar would be able to deny this obvious fact. Based on the example of the Prophet Muhammad with Aisha, the minimum age for marriage in the Sharia was not fixed to a specific age. It was left to the guardian of the girl to decide which age to give his daughter in marriage. In Surah Al-Talaq 65, verse 4, the Quran allows the father of the girl to give her in marriage before she has begun to menstruate or has her first monthly period. The Prophet married Malika bint Ka'b, who was known for her resplendent, magnificent beauty. Aisha entered to her and said, "Are you not ashamed of marrying the killer of your father?" So, Malika took refuge with God from the Prophet, and he divorced her. Tabaqat ibn Sa'd, Volume 8, page number 141, and also in Asad al-Ghaba, Book 5, page 525. Aisha noticed that whenever the Prophet Muhammad wanted to sleep with a woman, he claimed that Allah revealed to him a verse and justified his action. In that regard, Aisha sarcastically remarked, "It seems to me that your Lord hastens to satisfy your whims." Sahih Muslim, Volume 2, pages 748 to 749. It was not clear on what occasion Aisha made such a doubting remark. Some sources referred it to the incident when the Prophet was caught by his wife Hafsa in the very act of having sex without the sanctity of the marriage bond with his maidservant Maria the Copt, and other sources related it to his scandalous marriage with Zainab bint Kohash, the wife of his adopted son, Zayd ibn Muhammad. Finally, Natasha talked to the mother of the girl, but the mother said she had no hand on that decision. It is her husband who decided to give his daughter in marriage to her male cousin brother. Therefore, Natasha understood the door of protesting was shut in her face. This serious matter is so disturbing and torturing her conscience. More disturbing than the act of marrying and raping a female child is the fact that Muslims today defend the practice of pedophilia and find the religious authority to back up their defense. Since, as they say, the Holy Prophet Muhammad did it, no mortal being can abolish it. Chapter 10. The Deceiving Polygamist. While Natasha is witnessing those terrible abuses against women in Muslim society, a new serious problem erupted inside those two good neighboring families. This time the problem has something to do with her best girlfriend and relative Shama Yasser Saif al-Dawla. By the way, Shama is the firstborn biological daughter of the late, evil religious leader Sheikh Yasser Saif al-Din, who got brutally killed in Somalia. Therefore, Shama and Natasha are true sisters, but so far neither of the two knows about that blood relationship. Shama is the daughter of Badriya, the first wife of that evil man. The only difference between the two sisters, Shama and Natasha, the former is a legitimate daughter who was born within the sanctity of the halal marriage bond, whereas the latter was born out of adultery. At any rate, one day Natasha is extremely shocked when she came to know that her widow relative Shama is betrothed by the polygamist who has 3 wives and 21 children. But she is requested by Haja Fatima and Shama to keep the matter top secret until the marriage takes place. The two widowed women are scared that the 3 rival wives might either kill Shama or turn her life into a living hell if they come to know that their best girlfriend and a good neighbor is secretly planning to marry their commonly shared polygamist husband. Moreover, Natasha is told that the polygamist is quite a wealthy man, and he is planning to purchase the house of Haja Fatima and keep his new 4th wife Shama in his newly bought house. According to the secret deal, the polygamist promised to allow Haja Fatima to stay in her own sold house, and he would treat her as his new mother-in-law. Of course, such a secret deal made the two widows exceedingly happy. Even so, Natasha seemed to be not happy about this behind-closed-doors conspiracy of her two relatives. She believes Shama should not marry the husband of her best good 3 female neighbors. But Shama laughed and sang to her a Sudanese song which says, Rajul al-Mara Hilahala, which means the husband of a married wife is so sweet for her girlfriends. In other words, girls in Sudan love to marry the man who has another wife. Nevertheless, before such a secret deal is fully completed, a serious legal dispute erupted. The dispute has nothing to do with the marriage of Shama and the polygamist. The secret marriage is already conducted in the mosque between the polygamist and Shama's grandfather, who acted as her wali guardian. Shama has no idea that her real father got slain in an honor killing in Somalia. What her mother told her about her father is that he ran away when some men wanted to kill him because he made their 14-year-old girl pregnant before marriage. Ever since, no one knew whether he is still alive or dead, in Sudan or abroad, and if he died, he went to hellfire or paradise. The problem has something to do with the selling of the house of Haja Fatima. As a matter of fact, her house is still under the name of her late husband who died many years ago due to cancer. Because of the house under the name of her late husband, his brother and sister claimed their shares on the inheritance of their deceased brother. If Haja Fatima's son Tariq Hassan Shams al-Din is still alive, then he is allowed to inherit alone the house of his deceased father. His widowed wife Shama cannot claim his inheritance in his demise. But in the absence of any child for Haja Fatima, the brother and sister of her husband are allowed to claim shares of their deceased brother. According to the Sharia, when the husband dies and he does not leave any children, his permanent wife will inherit a quarter of the property, and the remainder is for the remaining heirs. The remaining heirs here are his brother and sister. The man should inherit a double share of what the woman should get. Quran, Surah Al-Nisa 4, verse 11. In this case, Haja Fatima will get a quarter of her husband's house market value, and her husband's brother and sister should receive 3/4. The brother will get 2/4 and his sister 1/4. Sadly, the old widow did not know about this until she sold her house to the polygamist. The wicked polygamist knew about this matter and hid it from the two widows until he married Shama and bought the house of Haja Fatima. He gave the old widow 1/4 and handed the other 3/4 to her husband's brother and sister. The house has been sold for $4,000. Haja Fatma got $1,000, her husband's brother received the lion's share of $2,000 and gave his sister $1,000. Moreover, as soon as he married, Shama the deceiver reneged on his promise and asked Haja Fatima to go out of his newly purchased property. He said he decided to convert his 2 houses into one big house and live like a king with his 4 wives or harems and 21 children. Sadly, the Canadian girl Natasha is also asked to go from where she had come. Luckily, Haja Fatima has a married brother who invited her to come and live with his wife and daughters. The good old woman asked her Canadian female relative to move with her to her new dwelling place. The great loser in this evil deal turned out to be the newly married widow Shama Yasser Sef al-Dawla. As soon as her former mother-in-law and girlfriend Natasha left, the 3 rival wives defied the authority of their commonly shared husband, and they mercilessly hammered her and left her half dead. After that brutal beating, she was rushed to the hospital by her new man. Of course, the angry husband had beaten his 3 wives for defying his authority by attacking his new lawful 4th wife. After she got discharged, Shama went back to those angry wives and lived between them as a new unwanted rival wife.